Well, good afternoon and welcome to. Yeah, come on, you can do it.
Your American Heritage, baby.
Boy, Theron's been in radio so long, you'd think he'd come in on time. My name is Ed Bonderenka, and I
a
am.
white, a white Christian cisgender male.
Yeah, and also
Not your normal fluffy insurrectionist.
producing the show is the guy that answers phones, warns me commercials are coming, puts the guests on, tells me my microphone is muted. That's Derek Stone, the Swiss Army knife of radio, and also the host of.
Stone Cold Sports Truth.
Yeah, Sundays at noon 30, right after my friend Sean Todd hosts the intersection at noon, because the intersection is, of course,
Not your normal fluffy Christian show.
you should listen to both shows before Operation Freedom with that Dr. Dave Janda comes on at 2. Listen to the whole Saturday lineup, Abolitionist Roundtable, Trigger Talk, this show, and then to be calmed by a cultural influence. Stay tuned to Speaking of Heart with my friend Ed Hoffman. So Your American Heritage is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You should subscribe, boost the signal, be a friend, be a Paul Revere, get the word out. You know, I've said it before. I'm going to say it again, probably say it again for years, as long as I'm doing this show. There is a war going on for control of America and you, and it is a spiritual warfare. It's a struggle to enslave mankind, and it's been going on since before we arrived on this planet. You know, as an aside, I suggest you find The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. I do not say this lightly, and yet I do not say believe everything he says, but listen to it, research it. So how do we fight back? We get organized, preferably in a good church. We go to court. We educate our neighbors. We support those who take the battle to the enemy. And we support those who are running for office that support godly values. And then we make sure they do. And we arm ourselves intellectually. We learn the facts for ourselves so we can make wise decisions and explain them to others. And then physically, get a gun, learn to use it. Be prepared to defend yourself, your family, your neighbors, and your nation. And then we arm ourselves spiritually. Once again, find a good church, read the Bible, join with others in prayer for our nation. Psalm 144 says, "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." Please clasp those hands and your fingers. Let's pray. Let's go to war. Father, please lead us and guide us as we seek to protect this nation. Please help us protect our heritage and the rights that you have given us. From evil conspirators, thieves, traitors, tyrants, please bring these enemies of good and sound morals to a place of repentance. And if they will not repent, please remove them utterly from our presence. Amen.
Amen to that.
Oh, thank you. My guest today is Mark Tapson. Mark's been on the show a few times, and I like having smart people on, so I look smart by association. Mark's a writer almost everywhere. I'm not going to list everywhere he writes. He's a writer. He's a screenwriter. He's a homeschooling father of 6, so he's a warrior. He's a culture warrior. He writes on Substack as Culture Warrior and at Mark Tapson. And he's the host of The Right Take with Mark Tapson broadcast or podcast, which I listen to, I was going to say religiously, but no, regularly. And I'll be replaying one of his podcasts during the second hour. Very highly informative podcast. And I thought, why should I reinvent the wheel? And I got Mark's permission to rebroadcast, and you will enjoy that. He's on X as Culture Warrior at Mark Tapson, and he's a Knight Templar in a former life. You know, who knew? Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Thank you. Well, I first want to mention the passing of David Horowitz. I think I mentioned it a show or two ago, but you as a fellow of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, would you speak about his passing briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me interject there real quickly before I forget. I just want to emphasize what you mentioned at the outset about spiritual warfare, and I want to second that motion because we are definitely in a period of intense and intensifying spiritual warfare. And I also want to recommend the book that you recommended, The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser, who died just a couple of years ago, actually. And my best friend, Brian Godawa, who is a screenwriter, was friends with Michael Heiser and also highly regards his work. So I too recommend that book, Unseen Realm, and everything else that Heiser writes. But as far as spiritual warfare goes, we are definitely engaged in it. In fact, my men's group at my church is putting on a spiritual warfare retreat in a couple of weeks, where I'm going to speak and talk about that because it's something that it's easy to forget that we're in spiritual warfare because We get focused on the politics or on the culture, but there's this whole other realm beyond and behind all of that that is really where the battle is taking place. And if we're not focused on that, then we're not going to win in the political or cultural realms either.
Before you go on about David, then let me add to what you just said. By the way, there is a YouTube video, The Unseen Realm. It might be easier for you to watch that video rather than read the book. And there's also a book called Supernatural, which is a summation of The Unseen Realm, which is more readable if that's what you like, and it's a little less expensive on Amazon too. But it's something's going on. When I was a kid, I used to read comic books. Well, actually, guiltily enough, I read them as an adult too. We call them what do we call them? Graphic novels.
Right.
And there used to be some called the New Gods and this and that, Marvel characters. And I just, come on, and the Thor and Loki stuff always drove me nuts, And
Yeah.
now there's stuff going on. There really is stuff going on. And you watch, like I've mentioned it here before, you watch Babylon 5, and which I think is one of the finest science fiction TV series ever. And there's some characters in the background called the Vorlons, and they're sort of the good guys. And then there's these other characters called the Shadows that nobody sees except a few people, and they inform their characters who do bad things, and so it kind of correlates to the fact that there are spiritual forces that speak to people and motivate them to do good or evil. And I watch political characters sometimes, and I think, who are they listening to? So if you want to fill in on that, go ahead before I ask you to talk about David Horowitz.
No, that's a good point. Well said. I wasn't aware that there was an Unseen Realm video on YouTube. I might check that out myself. But
and you can listen to it on Spotify also. There's the audio version, which is where I first caught it. So I was driving and I said, man, there's a lot of music and musical interludes in here. This must be on YouTube. So
David Horowitz, for those people who might not know, David Horowitz, for the last 40 years or so, has been one of the real intellectual powerhouses of the conservative movement and a real driver and fighter for our side. The David Horowitz Freedom Center, which is the nonprofit that I work for, was founded decades ago. And David founded it not as another think tank, but as a battle tank. And his background is very interesting because, like a lot of conservatives, myself included, he started on the left, although he started way, way farther left than I did. I was what you would consider a classical liberal now, and the conservatives are actually classical liberals. But
yeah.
David grew up the son of full-fledged communists. I mean, he was a red diaper baby and grew up as a communist himself. He was a far-left radical who worked with the Black Panthers and supported, the far-left agenda. He even wrote a couple of books supporting that cause. And then, along with his co-writing partner, who has also passed away a few years ago, Peter Collier, they had a political epiphany of sorts and a complete 180 conversion for various reasons, which I won't go into here. But essentially, they saw the light politically and began to write for conservatism. And David, since then, has written, I don't know, dozens of incredible, powerful books in support of freedom and conservatism and American culture and liberties. And I just can't say enough about his influence on me and countless other Americans. He died just about a month and a half ago, I think, at the ripe old age of 86. So it was not, untimely or unforeseen, but I'm telling you, the guy fought to the last breath. Because I know personally, because I work with him, that literally until the last day he was writing and as much as he could, excuse me, and working to fight for our cause. And that's one of the things that David taught me and many other conservatives is to take off the gloves and get in the fight, because conservatives have this tendency to sort of play by the rules. I mean, Not that we shouldn't play by the rules, but David came from the left and he understood the left better than they understood themselves, because he knew all of the ideological background and the Marxist indoctrination. He understood all that on an intellectual level, and understood that that conservatives need to fight also, that we need to get in the gutter and fight, sometimes on their own terms, on the left's terms. And that's what Trump does. That's one of the things that Trump does that has made him so successful against the left, and it drives the left so crazy, is because he fights on their level and they can't deal with it. They're used to conservatives like Mitt Romney or John, what's his name? Yes, John McCain. We're used to noble losers, as David put it, like that. And Trump comes along and he takes the gloves off and fights, and it makes the left insane. They don't know how to handle his mockery, for example, which is their strategy. That's their tactic.
It's an Alinsky tactic.
That
right?
is exactly right.
Exactly. And it's funny. He also drives a lot of people on the right nuts too. I have a friend who writes a blog, and almost every other day her post is, "Oh, I wish Trump would be quiet. I wish he wouldn't talk like that. He's going to alienate people." And the rest of the comments are you kidding me? This is Trump. Whole package. What you get. That's why he is where he is.
And it's fine. I have. I personally, Trump's not my style either. I personally had to kind of come to terms with some aspects of his personality that I would not ordinarily be in favor of. But as you put it, the whole package works very well for conservatism. And I think that's what a lot of establishment conservatives are very uncomfortable with. Well, of course, a lot of establishment conservatives don't want the boat rocked at all, so that they're opposed to Trump for much the same reason that the left is. But Trump makes me uncomfortable sometimes too. But the alternative is someone who is nice and polite and plays by the Marquis of Queensberry rules, as they say, like a Mitt Romney. And conservatives like that just get steamrolled by the left. So we have to learn to fight to win. And that's what David Horowitz taught.
Exactly. And we have a guy who, when he gets shot at, stands up, says, "Oh yeah, fight."
Yeah.
Instead of ducking down, he's standing right up.
Exactly. Or apologizing for, offending someone.
For bleeding on your microphone. No, that's not it.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, we're going to take calls in the second half of the show. So, if we say something that triggers a comment, we'll let you bring it up later, and feel free to call in then. But for right now, I just want to set some, not ground rules, but a basis for the conversation here. For instance, like I said, I listen to Mark's podcast, and I read his Substack. I actually subscribe and get the elements in my mail, so I know what's going on. And you had something that really struck me, and a couple months ago, I think, and that's, I got to get Mark on. Actually, by the way, I had David Horowitz on a couple years ago, and I've been saying the same thing. I got to get David back on again, and I waited too long. So I won't wait so long next time again for you. That Ora e Labora, the value of work, you wrote on that. And I thought that really strikes home, because I've had these conversations. And I want to tread lightly here, because I have a lot of friends. I have relatives who are retired now and ask me, why am I not retired? And this is not a criticism of anybody. Frankly, my brother works harder now. He likes to say that all the time. I don't know how I had time, to work before, because I work so hard in retirement, doing work for other people, doing good for other people.
Yeah.
And, I like what I'm blessed to like what I do for a living. And I find creative output in it, even though it's telling a machine what to do. I do it creatively. And I can't point to anybody else and say, "You see how cool I did that?" Because nobody else knows. But yeah, there's value of work. You want to speak to that for a bit?
Yes, I think it's it's really important, I think, especially for men. And I write a lot about men and masculinity. It's important for everybody to feel that they have purpose in life. that they don't just have a job that they go to and, in some kind of 8 to 5 job. And there's nothing wrong with that. But people need to feel that the work that they do is more than just clocking in and clocking out and earning a paycheck. It needs to be something that is meaningful to their soul and their sense of identity. And so I wrote an article which I think was called Ora et Labora, which is Latin for prayer and work. And it's a phrase that's associated with a 6th century monk named Benedict, Saint Benedict, who started the Benedictine order. And Benedictine, it basically, I don't want to say he invented monasticism, but the Benedictines were really a monastic order that took off and popped up all over what at the time was a Europe that was mired in the Dark Ages. I mean, the Middle Ages in their entirety were not dark, but certainly the beginning period of the Middle Ages, the first few hundred years after the collapse of the Roman Empire, when it was just chaos and disorder and barbarism.
Apocalyptic.
Because all of the structures of Roman civilization had kind of collapsed, and so the only real locuses or loci of civilization were monasteries, where all of the previous, works of the classics and things like that, and also intellectual works of monks and early Christians were preserved and added to throughout the centuries. But anyway, Saint Benedict wrote a famous rule for monastic living, and he promoted the idea of ora et labora, prayer and work. We usually think of monasticism as being very contemplative and spiritual, but Saint Benedict believed that prayer and work formed a kind of a partnership of labor that engaged not only your body, but also your spirit, and united body and spirit. And I think that's what's really important for people to aim for in their lives and in their work, something that nourishes both their body and spirit. Because if work is undertaken in the right frame of mind, then there's a kind of a humbling, spiritually nourishing aspect to it. And that's very meaningful to people. And in that respect, hopefully you don't have to retire. Hopefully you can find some way to continue work in a prayerful fashion. And even if you're not religious or not Christian, you could view it as a meditative form of work. But in any case, either way, bringing a sort of a prayerful focus to your productivity adds a meaningful dimension to it and makes your life worthwhile. So that's what the article was largely about. And I went on about a personal experience that I had about a mentor that I had, a professor and a friend who really embodied that whole ora et labora way of life. And I learned a lot from that. So that's what that article is about.
Yeah, you actually apprenticed at his house, so you helped him remodel his house, right?
Yes, and that also has a kind of medieval aspect to it because the cathedral building was sometimes a centuries-long process that involved dozens, if not hundreds, of people, and sometimes generations of people. Because there were lots of people who worked on cathedrals who started, the cathedral had been started before they were born, and it kept going after they died. So cathedrals were really a work in progress. The cathedrals are sort of the architectural embodiment of ora et labora, something that's kind of an ongoing work of praise and worship. And my friend, who was a professor and mentor, as I said, I helped him for a summer, actually a whole year, helped him for a whole year kind of remodeling his house, but it was an ongoing project. It was never his intention to actually finish working on the house. I learned that after a while. It was something that his wife had grown accustomed to and just kind of accepted, was the fact that her husband was going to constantly be hammering somewhere in the house, because that was his form of worship, I think, was building on that house and doing productive, meaningful spiritually engaging work, and I learned that from him about working on his house.
It's funny you mention it like that. And I was thinking about this yesterday and the day before because speaking about always working on your house, just yesterday, my son came over and helped me finish tiling the hallway in my house, which has been since the water damage of last late summer. And the wood came up. I put ceramic tile down and I did about half of it. He did about half of it. It's been sitting there waiting to be grouted. And I just hate grouting. And I don't like getting down on my knees these days so much. And so he said, "Come on, let's do it. Let's do it." We did it. And we looked back at that and I thought, for one, we had a sense of fellowship working together on this
Yeah.
and a real sense. I look back on that hallway even now and I look like, wow, that's something we did together. It's done. It didn't come out horrible. It came out looking rather nice after all, for all the fear I had of screwing it up. And I don't know why I've done tile before, but it's been about 10 years and you just get kind of antsy. I was working on a friend of mine's brakes the other day. I came home from work and I had him pull his truck in the garage and then oh, you need this and now you need that. And now run out to the store and get this. And it just became a long project.
Yeah.
I took the afternoon off and I was working on it into the evening. And he looked at me and he says, "You like doing this, don't you?" And I said, I don't like doing this so much as I like doing it. I like punching my man card, to prove I can still do this stuff. But the other thing is that I get a satisfaction out of helping people. And I'm not trying to be careful here and not sound as self-aggrandizing or anything like that. But I just like being able to be of value to other people by doing stuff for other people.
Yes.
And then there's a sense of bonding. There's a sense of bonding working on stuff like if my brother and I are swapping an engine out or something like that. He said, "Well, that's the only time we ever visit was when we're working together on vehicles." I said, "Yeah, but it's so satisfying." We look back and say we did that.
Yeah.
And we've probably only got a minute left. And I just want to say, you don't want to get so wrapped up that all your self-image is in your work, to where you have no,
No.
yeah, you don't relate to anybody else or your kids. Go ahead.
No, you got to have balance. You can't be the kind of, or it's not good anyway, to be the kind of guy who is so obsessed with career that he neglects his family or, comes home from work after his kids have already gone to bed, because you have to find the right kind of balance to make sure that the various dimensions of your life as a man are not neglected. You might have it's great to have a career, but you've also got a family. And so you need to learn to prioritize those kinds of things. That's something I've had to work on myself.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I worked the afternoon shift, and that's just part of the job. And so I miss my kids in the evening a lot, and I regret that to some degree. I'd take evenings off to go to ball games and the like, but
Yeah.
that's just the way it works sometimes. Derek says we got a minute left. We got 30 seconds left. That's about the length of the music. So we can take this conversation up after the break. And folks, I hope you come back. We're talking to Mark Tapson. And come on back. Your American Heritage.
On the front lines, standing unafraid.
Well, welcome back to Your American Heritage. Today's Mark Tapson Day. He's my guest, and he's going to be hosting his guest on my show the second hour. So don't get confused when you tune back in after the break. It'll be Mark interviewing somebody that he was talking to, and I thought that's so great. I want my audience to be able to hear that. And he was gracious enough, despite all his disclaimers on his broadcast about unauthorized rebroadcasting, this is authorized. So that's good. And we were talking about the value of work, and we are talking about spiritual warfare. And if you want to call in, the number is 734-822-1600. Oh, look at that. We have a caller already. So, Derek, who's calling?
It's your wife, Sherry.
Oh, and now for a word from our sponsor. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, sweetheart.
when you first started talking with Mark, you mentioned spiritual warfare. So not to take away from what you were last talking about, but it made me think about a man that I was sitting at the table with yesterday when I was down in the dining room with my dad. He asked me if I had seen the movie The Exorcist. We had started talking about Christianity, and he asked me if I'd seen the movie The Exorcist and if I knew what it was about. And I said, yes, I'd seen the movie, and yes, I knew what it was about. And he said, so do you believe in all that speaking in tongues stuff? And I said, I do believe in speaking in tongues. I said, but speaking in tongues when you're praying in the Holy Spirit versus being demon-possessed, I said, there's a big difference. And this exorcist was being about demon-possessed. That's not praying in the Holy Spirit and talking to the Lord with the Holy Spirit talking through you. And I think if we don't teach the people the right way, the right things, people need to know what they're being taught, not just hearing words, then they're not going to learn correctly. The same with anything political or spiritual. So, I don't know, that just made me think of that when you guys were saying that.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in. I'm going to talk about this after you hang up a bit. It brings to memory something. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for the call. So, and thanks for the coffee. So, my wife and I went to a church, and speaking of this is germane to the conversation because I talked about watching people and wondering what their motivations are, and I ran into a guy, and I said, "Hey, we met this guy." And I said, "I like this guy. Let's get together for dinner sometime or with our spouses." And so the guy says, "I'm not so sure that would work." And I was at work a couple days later, and I really felt the Spirit of God was telling me, "Call him up and have a dinner date with him tonight." And so I put it off. It kept popping up. Yeah, in a minute. And then somebody called me and distract me. And then so I'm driving home undistracted, and it's like all of a sudden I'm reminded, call that guy for dinner tonight. So I call him up. He says, well, I'm not sure it would be a good idea. It's a spiritual demonic opposition, blah, blah. I was like, what? What do you want on your pizza? My wife and I are bringing pizza. What do you want on your pizza? Give me your address, So I called Sherry, and she orders the pizza, and we go over there, and the guy's sitting in his house, and the whole house is dark except for a single lamp. I mean, this looked like a movie, like a horror movie. Single lamp over the dining room table. His wife is sitting there, and she has this clouded, dark look over her face, and she's not happy to see us. And, it's he and I go talking. He tells me about some events that took place recently in his house. And so I'm leaving. I says, come to church tomorrow night. Make sure you come to the Bible study tomorrow night. He says, yeah. I said, I'm telling you, come to the Bible study tomorrow night. He went to the Bible study. His wife stood up at the very beginning. The guy teaching said something about the blood of Christ. She stood up, started cursing like a sailor, and walked out. He followed her. And these are people who went to a Christian church. They were saved. Everybody knew they were saved. But something got into her. And I know how it worked. That's not germane to the story. But regardless, we went back in the foyer while I told the teacher, I said, join us and have everybody pray. Obviously pray, okay? So we got a whole church full of people praying while, this guy's name was Ed too. He comes in the back of the church, says, I want you to lay hands on her and pray for her. He laid hands on her and prayed for her. We stood around and prayed. And all of a sudden, her face just lightened up. That was it. It was all over. No green puke, no nothing, but there was definitely something there. We did not go back to church with them because it was kind of embarrassing for them. And we went out to ice cream and coffee with them instead. And he and I are at the register while they're sitting outside on the sidewalk, and we're looking at each other. And he says, I don't know either, but I'm just glad that's over. And, and the thing is that I watch people on the news, and you go like, are they demonically possessed or oppressed, or what's motivating them to do that? And there's some people that they're opening themselves to do it, but I don't think they've done it yet. But part of the discernment is knowing what to do about it. And it's part of the spiritual warfare. But then you see it on a grander scale on the political scale, stage, let's say. Do you have any? That was pretty heavy. Sorry about that. Do you have any comment on that before we take a call?
Well, yeah. And it's funny. I remember seeing The Exorcist in the theater There had never been a horror movie like that before. And it caused quite a controversy. And I think it's because it really exposed or pulled no punches about the real horrific evil that is behind demon possession, and that's part of this whole spiritual warfare. And I think people witnessed this kind of evil, at least in the movie screen, for the first time ever when that movie came out. The book also is very good, by the way. But it's, I do think that if you look around at the political world, you can see demonic activity. I mean, this is some of the progressive radicalism, I think, can really be described only in that way, as demonic activity. I think if you look at some of the drag queen story hour, the whole drag queen phenomenon now, this is not like, if you look at some of these drag queens, they look like demons. This is not the drag of, Jack Lemmon and what was the movie? Some Like It Hot. This is not that.
Yeah.
It's not Benny Hill dressing up like a woman. This is a whole other level of exaggeration about feminine characteristics, and some of these drag queens look like demons straight out of hell. I think that's no coincidence. I think it's because there's demonic activity pushing that aspect of progressive politics. But anyway, there's definitely spiritual warfare going on and manifesting itself in the political realm, and you can see it in some of the progressive radicals who, scream, that protesters who are screaming insanely. It's just it's not politics as usual. There's something driving it that's really evil.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have a call from Joe Leonard from Wyandotte, and it's not surprising that Joe would call since I opened the phone lines. Derek, would you put Joe on, please?
Hello, brother. How are you today?
Fine, brother. Yourself? Go on.
Oh, like I always say, could be better, could be worse, right? We had our pro-life thing this morning. I just got home. But the work shall set you free, you're speaking of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the Nazis put that above the concentration camps, completely warping. Of course, forced labor is the opposite of setting anyone free. Yeah. But indeed, the Bible, that makes sense still. And it makes the distinction between the unable, who we are to be our brother's keeper and help widows and orphans and all that, versus the unwilling, which we have no obligation to. And to follow that up to get your reaction, how it ties together with the idle hands phrase.
Workplace of the devil.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that those all tie together. Skipping the whole Nazi warping of it, that's a valid biblical thing.
Yeah, if I might, I misquoted the phrase above Auschwitz. It's Arbeit macht frei, which is work makes free. Come on, are you kidding me? This is what's Orwellian? You know what I mean? In the perversion of the language. But that's a good point, Joe. We'll ask Mark to talk about that a bit.
That is a good point. It depends on what you're working toward or working for, or whom you're working for. I mean, the communists also would say, that people should always be engaged in work, but work for the state, because the state is their god.
Yeah.
So they don't intend for it to be spiritually meaningful, but to just be working always as kind of a slave for the state. I think Ben Franklin said, be always employed in something useful. But, cut off all unnecessary actions, he said. Of course, Ben Franklin was a little bit, he was kind of intense. But I don't think he intended that we just maintain a sort of a perpetual busyness just for its own sake. as Henry David Thoreau said, it's not enough to be industrious because the ants are industrious. What are you industrious about? So, so then, are you committing yourself to work for the state or work because of enforced slave labor, or are you doing it as a sort of a prayerful work to glorify God and to glorify His name through your work and through what you do? So it depends on what you're.
Absolutely. To tie that all back together, working for oneself and others through biblical community, free will, and choice, not communistic, worldly forced and theft of most of your labor for others. There has to be free will in there, is kind of what we're all tying together here.
That's right.
That's a good point.
All right. Love you, brothers. Take care. God bless.
All right. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.
So yeah, exactly. I mean, even like my dad was a coal miner, and he used to tell me about, he'd be on a cart on his back and, going up and chiseling away and then loading 16 tons. And what do you get? And then he'd actually be paid by how much he produced. But there comes a point where I was an assembly line worker, nowhere near as the same kind of drudge as that. But, you go in and you work the torque gun, you put the parts in, and you can look at it as like, oh, it's a drab job. Or you can say, you know what? If I do my job right, I get paid for this, and somebody's car is going to run right. As long as we all work together and do this, everybody does their part. Somebody's going to get a car out of this, and it's going to run right. And I get a paycheck and benefits, get to go home in one piece. So there's, it doesn't have to be the most creative job. I hate to be a raw cheerleader or something like that, but really it just depends on how you choose to view your work. I suppose it is.
Yes.
So something else you talked about, the topic that you talked about were manicures and manliness. And that's pretty interesting. I was driving back from the diner this morning. A guy had kind of a Rasta hairdo on, walking down the street, and he had beads on the end of each one of his they're not cornrows, so they're just braided locks coming down around him. And I thought, doesn't strike me as manliness. But then again, if you watch the Predator movies, the Predator alien hunters, they had that same do, So I like to keep a good manicure on my fingers, keep my fingernails clean and look presentable, but I'm not going to wear makeup, And but Jesse Waters, have you watched Waters World at all?
Sometimes.
You ever see him with his rules for men, like you don't drink you don't drink with a straw, and you don't lick an ice cream cone. And like, this guy does not look to me like, the guy who's the arbiter of what real men do or don't. But you want to speak on the subject?
Yeah, the reason my article was called Manicures and Manliness is that I was spinning off of something I'd read about these two entrepreneurs who created a program called Hard as Nails, which was an experiment to have men or research participants, men who would have their nails manicured, not just manicured, but painted like women. And in the process of that, the whole idea or the purpose was to explore men's attitudes about their own manhood and manliness. And the idea was to get them to open up about feeling suppressed by toxic masculinity or by stereotypes of manhood that they're expected to live up to, but instead inside they're just feeling this incredible pressure of rigid masculine expectations. And that's really the left's view of masculinity. This notion of toxic masculinity, the left believes that masculinity itself is toxic, not that there's just a toxic version of it, but that masculinity itself is the problem. And that it's nothing but a social construction. There's nothing natural about it. Same thing with femininity. The left believes that these are all social constructions that were enforced on men and women by a patriarchal, oppressive society, and that if we could just liberate ourselves from these rigid stereotypes, so the thinking goes, then we'll all be free and we can all be all genders. We don't have to present ourselves in certain ways. We can just go with the flow. So one day if we feel more feminine than another, we can claim to be a different gender. And the whole gender madness, it's a neo-Marxist idea that is designed to break down our understanding of masculine and feminine and our understanding of the roles of man and woman, because this goes back to Marx's priority, which was the abolition of the family. Marx explicitly wanted the abolition of the family. And the reason for that is that the family is sort of the first and last line of defense against the kind of collectivist totalitarian society that Marx wanted, or Marx envisioned as a utopia. In order to make his dream come true, this utopian, although it's actually dystopian, but in order to bring about the kind of society that Marx wanted, he had to break down the relationships between men and women. And to do that, you break down our understanding of masculinity and femininity. So that's really what is behind all of these things, like the left pushing gender ideology and trying to claim that men can be women, that, and vice versa. They want to say that there is nothing natural about this, that it's all socially constructed and weak, and therefore it can be deconstructed in order to liberate us all. So that my article kind of explored that whole idea. And as I said, what it comes down to, the whole agenda behind it is the breakdown of the family. And you can see that happening over the last half century in America, or in the West in general, the breakdown of the family. That is because cultural Marxism has been so successful, has been way more successful over the last 60, 70, 80 years than economic Marxism, which fails everywhere that it's tried. So the Marxists realized this early on. They thought, this whole economic Marxism idea isn't really bringing about the grand revolution we expected it to. We got to find another way. So they began to focus on the culture, where Marxism is extremely effective, or the Marxist agenda, I should say. So that's their focus now, is the breaking down of the family, and you can see it in all of its gender ideology that's being pushed. This is why the left works so hard to start as young as possible indoctrinating kids in the idea that gender is merely constructed, and that you can choose to be a boy or a girl, and that you were born in the wrong body. Somebody assigned you your sex at birth. That's what's behind and driving all of this gender nonsense.
Well, part of that is a social program that says, by the way, you're poor. You should have the man move out of the house so that we can give you, social programs. But if the man moves in the house, you're not eligible because he should be the wage earner, which is exactly true. But, so you just encourage this absence of manhood from the childhood of these poor, unfortunate kids. And then they lose that role model. And then now their moms are single moms. And then the state comes along and says, by the way, you don't have a role model, but let us tell you, you could be anything you want. And you probably are not really a boy, or you're really not a girl. You're probably not a
white Christian cisgender male.
I love that. Ever since I heard that, I had to copy that. Yeah. So go ahead.
I was just going to say that, yes, the whole reliance on the state is part of the Marxist idea also, because Marx wanted not only men to be the labor force, but women too. They wanted, Marx, the whole idea of feminism was to liberate women from this oppressive role as mother and wife, and put them out in the workforce as well, working for the benefit of the state, and children should be raised collectively. That was by the community. That was the whole Marxist ideal, and it's all for the benefit of the state. And that's why they needed to break down the family. And that's why feminism has been the tip of the spear of Marxism for the last half century. And now transgenderism has supplanted feminism as the whole tip of the spear of cultural Marxism.
Yeah. You also wrote about war, men, and the soul of the West, and we don't have time to get into that. But as you were speaking, I was thinking of the disaster. I'm not against war. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't think I'd rather have a peaceful solution like
Sure.
Trump. I'd rather have a peaceful solution. But hey, here's the carrot, here's the stick. And you got to fight for what you got to fight for. But then again, Paul Harvey imitation here. If I were the devil, I would probably have a World War I and a World War II, which would kill so many of the men that the women would be left without partners, and they'd be willing to have multiple. They'd be willing to share the partners they have. And then, we have this big war effort. All the men are off to war, so all the women got to go to work. And then the war is over, and all the women are like, I don't want to go back in the house. I kind of enjoy making my own money. So, there's two sides of that coin. There's, you be independent, but then decide what is really, and this goes back to biblical theology, teaching, whatever, what does God want for you to do? What does God want for the man to be and for the woman to be? And is there a time where you say, okay, I did that for a season. Now I'm going to be a mother and I'm going to be, I'm going to work in the house and raise these kids, because there's nothing wrong with that. You yourself are homeschooling 8 kids.
Oh, well, 5.
5. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
6. I'm sorry. I said 6 and you're telling me 5. Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like 8 sometimes, doesn't it? Be honest. Seems like 8.
They can be a handful, but they're good kids. And if we'd gotten started earlier on kids, we would have more, because they're just an incredible blessing.
Sorry, you caught me with coffee in my mouth.
No worries.
1 minute left. Yeah. So, with the time remaining, why don't you plug some of your efforts, and then I want to remind people that you're going to be basically featured in the second hour of this show as you interview
Josh Hammer.
Thank you, Josh Hammer. And so I appreciate you letting me broadcast that. But go ahead and plug some of your work. Tell us, where people can find you.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, the best place to go is my Substack account, which is marktapson.substack.com, or you can go to substack.com and look for Culture Warrior, and that's me. That's where probably most of my writing is. Otherwise, I write for, and sometimes there's overlap. I write
You got
for
15 seconds left. Oops, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, Mark, thanks a lot. Folks, come on back. Your American Heritage.
Thanks, Ed.